half of all American marriages end in divorce. But the greater tragedy is harder to see. Millions of couples who stay together are not living in love. They are living as strangers under the same roof, sharing a mortgage, a last name, and the silence that fills the space between them. Picture this. A man and a woman sit at a restaurant table in the suburbs. They have been married for 20 years. The waiter brings the check and places it carefully in the center, but neither of them reaches for it. Neither of them even looks up. His eyes are locked on the glowing screen of his phone. Her eyes stare past him, toward the couple laughing at the next table. The music is soft. The candles flicker. But the silence between them is louder than everything else in the room. This is not an unusual scene. It is one repeated across countless homes, diners, and family gatherings in America. Couples who once promised forever now sit side by side, with nothing left to say. They sleep in the same bed but dream different dreams. They raise children but drift further apart each year. And many of them wonder quietly, what happened to us? Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who declared that God is dead, offered a brutal answer more than a century ago. He claimed that what we call romantic love is one of humanity's most destructive lies. According to him, we have built an entire institution, marriage, on top of something temporary, unstable, and biological. And when that temporary high fades, the truth is revealed, often in the form of resentment, silence, or divorce. Stay with me, because this story is not just about why marriages collapse. It is about a deeper lie that has shaped how we think about love, commitment, and even our own identities. Nietzsche believed that the way society defines love is a kind of trap, one that convinces us to sacrifice the very parts of ourselves that make us alive. Think back to when you first fell in love. The world seemed brighter. Food tasted better. Every text message sent a thrill through your chest. Science now tells us what Nietzsche suspected long before neuroscience existed. That feeling is not divine. It is not destiny. It is chemistry. Your brain is flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. This chemical cocktail creates obsession, euphoria, and blindness to flaws. You are not thinking clearly. You are intoxicated. Imagine two young Americans in their 20s. They meet at a party. They lock eyes across the room. And within weeks they are inseparable. They post pictures on social media, glowing with joy. Within a year, they are looking at houses together, merging bank accounts, planning a wedding. They stand before family and friends, promising forever. And yet, underneath the vows, their brains are still hijacked by those same chemicals. This is what Nietzsche called the madness of love. He did not deny its power. He admitted it has a purpose. That madness pushes us to commit, to pair bond, to reproduce. It keeps the species alive. But here is the truth. It was never designed to last forever. Modern research confirms that the chemical high of falling in love lasts about 18 to 24 months. Then the flood recedes. The thrill fades. And what is left is not the glowing, the perfect partner you once saw, but a real human being, with flaws, habits, and contradictions. The spark dims. The conversations grow routine. The kisses lose urgency. And many couples wake up one day and wonder, did something go wrong? Nothing went wrong. The biology simply shifted back to normal. But most of us were never told this truth. Instead, the society taught us that when passion fades, what remains is real love. We were told that stability is maturity, that routine is intimacy, that compromise is the price of commitment. Nietzsche believed this was the cruelest lie of all, because it convinces us that the death of excitement is progress, that the erosion of individuality is virtue. Look around American culture, from Hollywood films to suburban weddings. We glorify the idea of permanent passion. We celebrate anniversaries as if endurance equals happiness. But endurance without authenticity is not love. It is slow spiritual death. And the silence that fills so many American homes is proof. I know these words sound harsh. They are meant to. Because the reality is harsh. Divorce courts are filled with men and women who once swore they would never let go. Therapists' offices are filled with couples wondering where the spark went. And dining rooms are filled with silence. broken only by the clink of silverware and the buzz of phones. Nietzsche's warning is not comfortable. But it is clear. The institution of marriage asks human beings to make permanent decisions during a temporary state of insanity. And when that state ends, as it always does, people find themselves legally and emotionally bound to strangers. So why do so many American marriages end in divorce? Because they were built on a chemical illusion, a temporary intoxication mistaken for eternal truth. And why do so many others remain together in misery? Because they have accepted the lie that shrinking yourself, compromising endlessly, and enduring emptiness is a sign of real love. The truth, as Nietzsche saw it, is far darker and far more liberating. Love is not a chain. Marriage, as society defines it, often becomes one. And until we face this lie, until we see it clearly, we will continue to mistake the silence at the dinner table for stability, and the absence of passion for maturity. Stay with me, because what comes next is the journey through the stages of this illusion. From the chemical high, to the fading spark, to the compromises that kill the soul, and finally, to the explosion that tears families apart. And beyond that destruction lies a possibility Nietzsche believed in. A kind of love that does not kill individuality, but celebrates it. When two people fall in love, it feels like magic. But beneath the surface, it is chemistry. A biological storm firing inside the brain. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, all rushing in a flood. That flood creates obsession, blinds judgment, and convinces you that the person in front of you is flawless. Nietzsche saw this more than a century ago. He called it the madness of love. Modern neuroscience has only confirmed what he suspected. Think about it. In those first months, everything feels amplified. A simple text message feels like sunlight breaking through the clouds. A late-night phone call stretches for hours, and you never run out of words. The flaws of the other person do not even exist in your eyes. Their quirks look charming. Their habits look endearing. You are not rational. You are high. This chemical high usually lasts somewhere between 18 and 24 months. It is long enough to get two people to make life-changing decisions. They move in together. They adopt pets. They buy homes. They merge finances. They stand before their families in a white chapel, exchanging vows that promise permanence. All while their brains are under the influence of natural drugs designed only for temporary bonding. In America, we celebrate this phase with expensive weddings and Instagram posts. We tell young couples they are living the dream. But Nietzsche would say they are living an illusion. They are mistaking biology for destiny. They are making eternal commitments while temporarily insane. What happens next? The chemistry fades. It always does. The flood turns into a trickle. The spark that once lit up every touch dims. The conversations that once flowed like rivers become small talk about bills, groceries, and car maintenance. The same SUV that once felt like freedom on long road trips now feels like a cage in traffic. Here is the tragedy. Most couples are never told this is natural. They think something is wrong with them. She notices he no longer looks at her with the same intensity. He notices she is not as playful as she used to be. Both are right, but neither understands why. What they are experiencing is not failure. It is withdrawal. Their brains are adjusting back to baseline. The chemicals are no longer hiding the differences that were there all along. Now the real differences emerge. Different values, different goals, different ways of handling money, children, and conflict. During the chemical high, those differences were invisible. Now they stand in the open. And they do not match the dream of forever. Society tells couples that this is the moment real love begins. That when the fireworks fade, what remains is mature intimacy. Nietzsche believed this was one of the cruelest lies. He called it a form of slave morality, a teaching that convinces people to celebrate diminishment as if it were growth. The fading of desire is rebranded as stability. The loss of individuality is called intimacy. And couples, desperate to hold on, I begin to compromise. At first, the compromises seem small. She holds back her adventurous spirit because he worries too much. He works longer hours to provide stability, but loses touch with his creative side. Slowly. And both begin to trim away the qualities that once made them attractive to each other. The mystery fades. The passion erodes. They think they are growing closer, but they are actually shrinking into shapes that fit the institution of marriage, not their authentic selves. Nietzsche saw this as a kind of spiritual suicide. The adventurous woman becomes cautious. The ambitious man becomes predictable. The passionate artist becomes practical. Each sacrifices pieces of who they are to preserve the relationship. But in doing so, they destroy the very spark that drew them together in the first place. In the American context, this phase is everywhere. A husband who once dreamed of building his own business now works endless hours in a cubicle for the health insurance. A wife who once painted or danced now spends her nights balancing the household budget and organizing carpool schedules. They tell themselves this is maturity. They repeat the cultural script: marriage is about sacrifice, stability, compromise. But deep inside, a quiet resentment grows. By the third or fourth year, many couples feel the weight of that quiet death. They still sit together in the SUV, driving their kids to soccer practice. But the conversations are flat. The laughter forced. They still share the same bed. But the passion has long since cooled. They still attend barbecues, family holidays, church gatherings, smiling for photos. But inside both feel invisible. Nietzsche described this as the triumph of herd morality. The tribe, in this case a household of two, pressures each partner to shrink into socially acceptable shapes. Be normal. Be stable. Be safe. But in the process, they abandon the vibrant individuality that once made them alive. And here lies the cruel irony. The more they compromise their authentic selves for the sake of harmony, the less attractive they become to each other. He fell in love with her fire, but now sees only resignation. She fell in love with his ambition, but now sees only fatigue. They confuse routine with intimacy. They mistake silence for peace. They call it maturity, when in truth, it is decline. This is where the resentment begins to build. The wife who set aside her career to support his ambition now feels unseen. The husband who worked himself raw to provide comfort now feels unappreciated. Every sacrifice becomes a grievance waiting to explode. Every accommodation becomes evidence of imbalance. And both partners silently wonder, did I give up too much? Nietzsche warned that the human spirit does not accept slow death quietly. When passion dies at home, it seeks life elsewhere. This is when many affairs begin. Not out of simple immorality, but out of rebellion against spiritual suffocation. People chase affairs, addictions, or sudden life changes as desperate attempts to feel alive again. At this stage, many American marriages reach their breaking point. Counseling is tried, vacations are booked, date nights are scheduled. But the deeper problem remains. Two people, once whole, have shrunk themselves into fragments in order to preserve a structure that demanded compromise over authenticity. The explosion, when it comes, shocks everyone around them. Friends and family wonder how such a stable couple could collapse. But what they never saw was the slow erosion inside. The dinners filled with silence. The small sacrifices that became permanent losses. The vibrant individuals who had been hollowed out by conformity. And when the explosion comes, it is not gentle. Divorce is rarely quiet. It is lawyers, custody battles, asset division, accusations. It is the ugly transformation of love into war. It is each partner not only fighting the other, but fighting the version of themselves that accepted a half-life for the sake of stability. This is the climax Nietzsche predicted. When the lie of love finally shatters, the destruction feels total. But as dark as this sounds, Nietzsche did not believe this was the end. For him, the collapse of illusion was not tragedy alone. It was also the beginning of clarity. Resentment does not stay silent forever. It builds like pressure in a sealed container. At first it leaks out in small arguments. The kind couples dismiss as normal. But over time, the arguments sharpen. Every word becomes evidence of imbalance. Every silence becomes proof of neglect. In countless American homes, this pressure eventually erupts. The wife who once felt invisible finds her voice, but it comes out as fury. The husband, who once felt unappreciated, lashes back with bitterness. The kitchen table becomes a courtroom. The bedroom becomes a battlefield. And the children, caught in between, To learn that love can turn into war. This is the climax of the illusion. Nietzsche would call it the revolt of the slaves. After years of suppressing their authentic selves, people rebel. They are not simply rebelling against their partner. They are rebelling against the diminished version of themselves they agreed to become. That is why divorce often looks so brutal. It is not just the end of a relationship. It is an attempt to kill the weak, compromised identity that marriage demanded. That is why custody battles become weapons. Why bank accounts become tools of revenge. Why friends and families are forced to take sides. It is not only about splitting property. It is about reclaiming a self that was lost. The man who worked himself into exhaustion feels robbed of his youth and demands his freedom through scorched earth litigation. The woman who sacrificed her dreams resents every year of invisibility and fights not just for money, but for recognition of her worth. To outsiders, it looks cruel. To Nietzsche, it looks inevitable. And yet, here is the most haunting truth. Divorce is not always the tragedy. The real tragedy, Nietzsche would say, is the couples who never revolt. The ones who remain together, not out of love but out of fear. Fear of financial ruin. Fear of judgment. Fear of loneliness. These couples survive, but they do not live. They drift through decades in silence. Their spirits dimmed. Their individuality surrendered. They are not proof of marriage's success. They are proof of its cruelest failure. So, where does this leave us? Should we abandon love altogether? Nietzsche did not think so. He did not dismiss love. He dismissed the lie we build around it. He saw that love, when it demands sacrifice of the self, becomes decay. But love, when it grows from strength, becomes creation. Think about the American story of resilience. A man or woman in midlife, standing after a divorce, rediscovering themselves. They pick up a guitar they haven't touched in decades. They start a small business they once dreamed of. They travel alone for the first time and feel alive in a way they haven't in years. Out of destruction, they begin to rebuild not just a life, but themselves. This, Nietzsche would say, is the path forward. Real love is not two incomplete people clinging to each other for rescue. Real love is two complete individuals choosing each other freely, without chains. Love should not be dependency. It should be abundance, a sharing of fullness, not a desperate attempt to cover emptiness. In practical terms, this means you cannot ask another person to fix the problems that only you can solve. You cannot demand that marriage supply the meaning you have never cultivated for yourself. You cannot outsource your purpose, your joy, your identity to a partner. If you do, resentment will grow. But if you take responsibility for becoming whole on your own, then love can become something else entirely. Imagine two people who do not need each other, but who want each other. Imagine a relationship where both continue to pursue their passions, their growth, their independence, while also sharing life together. They do not shrink to fit. They expand side by side. Their connection is not built on contracts or cages, but on daily choice. This terrifies many, because it strips away the illusion of security. No contract can guarantee that tomorrow your partner will choose you again. But Nietzsche would argue that is the only kind of love worth having. The kind chosen freely, day after day, not because of obligation, but because of authenticity. Security, he warned, is the enemy of greatness. Comfort is the enemy of growth. To try to make permanent what is naturally temporary is to invite decay. That is why marriage as an institution so often fails. Not because people are weak, but because the system itself contradicts human psychology and biology. The solution, then, is not better counseling, not stricter vows, not more compromise. The solution is stronger individuals. People who do not enter love out of need, but out of strength. People who can offer love as an overflow, not a bargain. For the American audience, this message is both brutal and liberating. It explains why the statistics are what they are, why half of marriages end in divorce, and why so many of the rest linger in quiet misery. But it also points to a different future, one where relationships are not cages, but celebrations, not contracts, but choices. Nietzsche's vision is not easy. It requires courage. The courage to stand alone. To face emptiness without reaching for someone else to fill it. The courage to build a life rich with purpose, meaning, and passion on your own terms, and only then, to share that life with another. This is what it means to become who you are. As Nietzsche urged, to stop shrinking for the sake of harmony, to stop sacrificing authenticity for stability, to stop mistaking silence for peace, and to start living fully, so that love can become a force of creation rather than destruction. If you reach this level, something remarkable happens. Relationships transform. They no longer drain your energy. They amplify it. They no longer demand your compromise. They inspire your growth. And if they end cleanly, without the scorched earth destruction of divorce. Because neither person has abandoned themselves in order to belong. So why do most American marriages eventually end in divorce? Because they were built on the lie that temporary chemical states equal permanent truth. Because people made lifelong promises while intoxicated by biology. Because they confused compromise with intimacy and sacrifice with love. But here's the deeper truth. The high divorce rate is not only a symptom of failure, it is also a sign of life. It means people still have the strength to rebel against systems that diminish them. It means the human spirit still resists silence, conformity, and spiritual death. The question is whether we can go further, whether we can build connections not on illusion, but on authenticity, whether we can stop asking marriage to complete us, and instead start completing ourselves. In the end, Nietzsche's message is not hopeless. It is a call to courage, to stand fully as yourself, and only then, to love, to reject the lie that love must mean shrinking, and to embrace the truth that love, at its best, it means expansion. So the tragedy is not that marriages end. The tragedy is that so many never truly lived. But the possibility remains, waiting for those brave enough to claim it. Love without chains, connection without cages, intimacy without the death of individuality. That is the revolution Nietzsche foresaw, and it is still waiting for us today.